from Kuwait by force. We will not fail.
War begins in the Gulf as Allied jets launch airstrikes on Iraq. Good evening. The frightening consequences of the 5-month-long crisis in the Gulf are tonight being fought out in the skies over Iraq. The war began 9 hours ago when squadrons of Allied planes launched a preemptive strike against Baghdad. They attacked during the night with devastating success and reportedly very few losses.
As the world lined up against Iraq, Saddam Hussein was again thumbing his nose, this time with his troops at the Kuwaiti front line. If he realized what was about to happen in Iraq, he certainly wasn't showing it, as he wandered casually with the soldiers who helped take over Kuwait 5.5 months ago. In Baghdad also, there was no signs of foreboding. In fact, as the deadline passed at 8 o'clock in the morning Iraqi time, cameras were allowed to see that children were going to school as normal. But ominously, the streets were unusually deserted, and as Baghdad began its last hours of peace, Allied strike planes were leaving their bases. Just before 1 o'clock in the morning, a squadron of F-15 bombers flew out of a secret base in central Saudi Arabia, carrying their deadly cargoes of Sidewinder and Sparrow missiles. They were joined by British Tornadoes, which had been involved in special low-flying exercises to avoid Iraqi radar detection. First word of the attack came during a live interview with ABC America's Baghdad correspondent, Gary Shepard.
I'm looking directly west from our hotel now, and throughout the entire sky there are flashes of light. Something is definitely underway here. Something is going on. The whole sky lit up with these flashes continually occurring, and now we can see an obvious tracers in the sky, planes now coming toward this hotel, and flashes, the sound of flak and flares. Obviously, an attack is underway.
The locations targeted in the attack included Iraq's Scud missile sites, oil refineries, air bases, and command posts for Saddam's military. And another priority, the many chemical weapons factories scattered around Iraq. Iraqi retaliation wasn't immediately forthcoming, but air raid sirens blared throughout Saudi Arabia. Once again, it unfolded on television.
There are more sirens going off now. We are within range of Scud missiles, though the accuracy of those missiles is not terribly reliable.
Is there a lot of activity elsewhere at the moment? Just talk on about what you see and hear nearby you.
Well, I see people being ordered out of this area right now, Peter, and people are putting on gas masks and being ordered out.
Bill, it's your call, whatever you want to do anytime. You want to stay or do you want to go?
I haven't seen any do you want to show us what's going on over here, please? I haven't seen any incoming air activity at this point. The sirens have gone up and down. We also see some trucks going out on the highway.
All right, Bill, just to be totally clear about this, at any time you wish to leave us, you leave us.
That was the first of 2 emergencies here in Saudi Arabia. Fortunately, both were false alarms. But there are reports that Iraqi artillery has hit and damaged an oil refinery on the Saudi side of the border. Iran is the Saudi Arabian city closest to the front line, and here, as the first of an estimated 1,000 Allied warplanes hit their targets to the north, the streets remained quiet. There were some extra police patrols, but there was no general alert. People either slept through the start of the war in the Gulf or listened to their radios at home. There was more activity at the main media center. Some of the hundreds of reporters here watching the story unfold largely on television and largely from Washington. Well, that was the situation here when we filed that report just about an hour ago, and since then very little has changed beyond this. American warplanes, as we speak, are now back over Baghdad and back over Basra. We understand, although it's not been confirmed yet, that the B-52s have begun raiding the military areas of Basra, which is one of the major Iraqi port cities not too far north of here. In Baghdad itself, the F-18s and the F-15s are back in, testing, we believe, to see if the Iraqis have been able to get their air defense radar up and operating, because that's been one of the most significant features of this war so far. The total inability, apparently, of the Iraqi Air Force to get off the ground, of the Iraqi Army to launch its Scud missiles, and the total failure of Iraqi air defense to pick up the incoming Americans. Brian?
So, Peter, what can we expect next?
This air war could go on for 2 or 3 or even 10 days, according to some of the analysts. The massive amphibious units are out there in the Persian Gulf, just a few miles from here. Some of the strike planes have come from there already today. Most of them are coming from the border bases. It looks as though now that the British and the Americans and the Saudis are going to keep up round-the-clock attacks on all the Iraqi air bases to make sure that they're taken out. We've got reports from Israeli intelligence, the best in the area, that so far almost all the Scud sites, the Iraqi missile sites, have been taken out. But to make sure that job's done and done properly, the American Air Force and the British Air Force are now going to continue daylight raids. Once all of that's done, once the Iraqi Air Force and missile batteries have been neutralized, then we can expect, unless of course there's a surrender or a pullout in the meantime, then we can expect the big amphibious invasions. The 100,000 strong force of American Marines who are poised just off the coast here will hit the beaches at Kuwait. The Challenger tanks from the Desert Rats will go across the border, and the big M1A1 main battle tanks of the Americans will join them in a full frontal assault on whatever's left of the Iraqi army.
Okay, Peter, thank you. So far, there have been very few images of the raids themselves, but the American Defense Department has just released these pictures from Saudi Arabia. They were taken last night at the biggest US base near Riyadh and show F-15 fighter bombers preparing for their raids on Iraq. The single-engine planes were armed with cluster bombs and heat-seeking missiles, but so far the Pentagon has released no information on exactly which targets they hit. According to reports from the Gulf, most of the air raids were carried out by land-based jets. The Navy's planes on aircraft carriers are expected to join the action in the next few days. No pictures have been released of the planes returning, and no information about casualties, if any. There's still been no official word on Iraqi casualties, but it's believed Saddam Hussein was not injured. 4 hours after the Allied raids, the defiant Iraqi leader spoke on Baghdad radio, saying, "The great showdown has begun, and we will teach the Americans a lesson." In Washington, President Bush addressed the nation to tell them the assaults in Iraq will continue until Saddam leaves Kuwait.
The White House was closed to tourists today as part of a security clampdown right across Washington, but otherwise George Bush was trying to present an image of business as usual, holding a morning briefing with education experts and refusing all questions about war.
Life goes on, and
The outward show of calm belied a heightened state of urgency behind the scenes. The president had already made up his mind. The timing of the attack, some believe, was decided 2 days ago. Americans were not to find out until they sat down to watch the evening news, by which stage the attack was already underway. 20 minutes later, the White House's official confirmation.
The liberation of Kuwait has begun. In conjunction with the forces of our coalition partners, the United States has moved under the code name Operation Desert Storm to enforce the mandates of the United Nations Security Council.
Senior congressmen heard the news directly from the president.
I said, "Well, Mr. President, my Bible tells me that our Heavenly Father, who hears us in secret, will reward us openly. I'm praying for you every night."
It was another 2 hours before the president spoke to the nation, insisting that he had not started the war, but that he was determined to finish it.
5 months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined.
Defending the decision to go to battle now rather than wait, The president said it was clear no amount of economic or diplomatic pressure was ever going to persuade Saddam Hussein to surrender Kuwait.
Now, the 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force. We will not fail.
Conscious that this military adventure does not have the support of all Americans, Bush harked back to another conflict that divided the country and promised this time things would be different.
That this will not be another Vietnam. And I repeat this here tonight. Our troops will have the best possible support in the entire world, and they will not be asked to fight with one hand tied behind their back.
As for how his forces were performing so far,
the preliminary reports we have received in terms of the success of the operation, and that includes the possibility of casualties, have been very, very encouraging. The operation appears to have gone very well.
but the Pentagon declined to give a blow-by-blow description of specific targets hit.
I'm not prepared to say how we did. The purpose of our bombing facilities in the area of Baghdad is essentially to go after the command and control system of the Iraqi armed forces. And we're looking at principally military targets, command and control installations, air defense sites that could put our planes at risk, but they are militarily oriented targets.
Experts estimated the US has enough air power for 2,000 bombing raids a day on Iraqi targets, but they also warned against being overconfident of a speedy victory.
But even if we flew several hundred sorties, even 1,000 sorties, we have days to go before we have decisively defeated or incapacitated just the air and missile component and the weapons of mass destruction and command centers in Iraq and Kuwait.
It'll be remembered as the war that broke out live on television, which made it all the more traumatic for those with loved ones in the field.
I'm scared.
He's been there how long?
Every single person I know has a husband that's over there, and they all went home. They're all home, and they're scared too.
Nothing like this has ever happened in my lifetime, and it's kind of hard to deal with.
In the hours ahead, it's expected to become clearer just how successful the first wave of this attack has been and what sacrifices had to be made. Brian?
Now, Stephen, how long do you think this first phase of the offensive will last?
Well, the military strategists say it could take weeks before the bombing campaign has paved the way for the second phase, which is the assault by ground forces, and it's on the ground where where the heaviest casualties are expected, where the real desert storm will erupt, with no one able to predict its end.
Stephen
Brian?
Fennelly there. The apparent success of the airstrikes is being celebrated in Israel, the nation which Saddam said he would attack if war began. Not only has there been no Iraqi move against Tel Aviv, but the missiles he planned to use were destroyed in the Allied raids.
The moment the UN deadline passed, Israel braced itself for Saddam Hussein's threatened first strike. Air defences were on the highest alert, and heavily armed soldiers and police imposed a blanket curfew on the 600,000 Palestinians in Gaza. The first news of the Allied attack had people rushing for their gas masks. There was advice over radio to head for bomb shelters. At worst, stay inside their homes. The Israelis watched the battle unfold through the eyes of American television reporters in Baghdad, all the time waiting for the promised onslaught of Iraqi missiles. The attack that tonight never came. Then, early news that perhaps all of the Scud missiles aimed at Israel had been pinpointed and destroyed. But already there are many predictions about what could happen now.
The result could be radicalism spreading in Syria and Saudi Arabia and Jordan. And viewed from this perspective, the Middle East is going to stay as stable as it was for ages.
Israel is still on red alert, ready to fight if attacked. But its unique position in the Middle East means it must stay out of the conflict at all costs. Now the threat of terrorism on mainland Europe and Great Britain is very real. At London's Heathrow Airport, the army, with tanks and machine guns at the ready, are now patrolling the terminals. The first time such heavy military machinery has appeared on the streets of the capital. Security experts fear a series of bombings and assassination attempts by so-called sleeper undercover agents sympathetic to the Iraqi cause.
Saddam Hussein has made clear that if he has the capability and the opportunity, he will attack the Allies wherever they are. So it's the duty of us all, of everybody, to be vigilant.
The British papers generally welcomed the Allied attack, all agreeing that Saddam needed to be stopped now. But now there's the concern for the welfare of the thousands of British soldiers on the ground. Their job still lies ahead of them.
So there it is, Brian, as the papers are describing it, a real blitz on Baghdad, and they're certainly right.
Robert, what has been the reaction in Britain and Europe?
Well, here at the moment, it's just after 7 in the morning. All of Europe, all of Britain is just waking up to this horrible news. They will be shocked. They will be surprised, no doubt, that the Americans moved as quickly as they did. The British Prime Minister is saying that Saddam really got what he deserved. He just ran out of chances.
Prime Minister Hawke was the first Australian to learn of this morning's attack. President Bush contacting him in Canberra even before the Allied aircraft reached Baghdad. Mr Hawke immediately ordered our Navy's ships into battle, a decision he said later was the toughest of his political career.
Committing Australian forces to war weighed heavily on the Prime Minister, and it showed.
Our first thoughts today go to the 884 of our fellow Australian serving men and women most directly affected by this decision. We know that they will serve bravely and well, and we hope, above all, that they will return safely home.
As well as the crews of the guided missile frigate Sydney, the destroyer Brisbane and the supply ship Success, Mr Hawke mentioned Australian medical teams serving on hospital ships and Australians serving on exchange with other Allied forces in the Gulf.
War is full of terrible uncertainty. We cannot foretell what will be demanded of our serving men and women, but we can foretell how they will meet those demands. We are confident of their skills. We are grateful for their devotion.
Mrs Hazel Hawke was at the news conference to support her husband as the Prime Minister, his emotions obvious, explained the reasons for the decision.
We, all of us, wish for peace, but we cannot have peace just by wishing for it or just by talking about it. We have to work for it, and sometimes, tragically, we have to fight for it.
President Bush had phoned Mr Hawke at 9:50 a.m. Canberra time to tell him that massive Allied air attacks on targets in Iraq and Kuwait were imminent. Within 15 minutes, Mr Hawke had consulted Deputy Prime Minister Paul Keating, Defence Minister Robert Ray and other key cabinet members and issued the combat order to Australia's Naval Task Force through the Defence Force Chief, General Gratian. The Prime Minister agreed it was his toughest decision.
While it's the toughest, it is also, in the end, been a straightforward decision in that the principles are clear. Appeasement of an aggressor is an unacceptably high price to pay.
The main role of the Australian ships is to help form a protective shield around the US aircraft carrier Midway, which launched some of the planes involved in the Allied bombing of Iraq.
It's our hope and expectation, and we've been so advised, that the air and missile capacity of the Iraqis will be taken out quite quickly.
It might be as quick as 2 days, he said, and losing their air cover would have a major psychological impact on the Iraqi forces, possibly weakening their resolve to fight a long land battle. How long, then, would the war last?
It's a question which is obviously in everyone's mind. No one can say with certainty.
Now that war has begun, the government has agreed to demands from the opposition, the Australian Democrats and some Labor MPs for Parliament to be recalled. Both houses will hold special sittings next Monday and Tuesday, so the Gulf commitment can be debated, Brian.
But, Laurie, what can this debate achieve? I mean, isn't it just a little too late?
Well, it certainly is not going to change anything, Brian, and it's likely to be a fairly one-sided debate too. Opposition leader John Hewson has stressed this afternoon that the coalition stands firmly with the government on the issue, and in fact, he's called for national unity in the crisis.
Laurie Oakes there, thank you. Here in Sydney, a feeling of dismay now that the threat of hostilities in the Gulf has become reality. Peace demonstrators say they'll continue their campaigns to bring a quick end to the war.
For peace campaigners outside the American consulate, it was the news they feared most.
The liberation of Kuwait has begun. As of 7 o'clock p.m., Eastern Standard Time, Operation Desert Storm forces were engaging targets in Kuwait and Iraq.
I don't care who's right and wrong. Nobody deserves to die. No life form deserves to die. No animal deserves to die on this planet. For what? A bit of greed and a bit of concrete, a bit of bloody oil?
Security at the consulate was stepped up, police moving quickly to quash any hint of trouble.
Third World War begins. Bombers go.
It was the kind of news guaranteed to travel fast.
Their targets were strategic points in and around the Iraqi capital.
Crowds drew across the city. Some stopped work to follow each development. Others were able to tune in as they went. No one was immune, only a Melbourne Cup able to command equal attention.
What we're doing is going to chart the future of the world for the next 100 years. It's better to deal with this guy now than 5 years from now.
I would like to hope that it could be a short shock. I'd prefer that it didn't have to happen in the first place.
It was the kind of uncertainty typical on the streets.
I hope that it'll be a quick battle, but I'm not too sure if it will be.
I think it's the right thing as long as they don't get too carried away and know when to pull up.
Others were more decisive.
I'm still shivery, I'm telling you. I might get a fit if I don't go home soon.
I mean, it was too bad it's going on, but what they did to Kuwait wasn't right either.
You know, they shouldn't have gone in so quick. They jumped the gun, I think.
We're involved in the war. I mean, Australia is at war.
But with the commencement of fighting, many people today expressed reservations about our domestic security. They are worried that sheer distance alone won't insulate Australia from the strife in the Gulf.
Terrorism, whatever, can strike anywhere, any form. We were right beside the American consulate. Who's to say in the next 10 minutes the bomb won't go off there? Yeah, I've got goosebumps. It worries me.
More worried about the global consequences, those opposed to war return to the Defence Department.
No go war! Bring your frigates home!
A desperate plea, seemingly too late.
I really don't believe that holding hands, sitting across the leg is going to change the world. I just think that they're barking up the wrong tree, really.
In Melbourne, Defence Department officers also came under attack. Scuffles broke out when police tried to evict the crowd. And the anti-war movement has also massed in Brisbane, protesters urging our warships be recalled from the Gulf. Russell Bishop, National 9 News.
With the fear of reprisals over the Gulf crisis, it's been an uneasy day for Sydney's Arab community. Many took time out for prayer, while police increased patrols near the Muslim mosque at Lakemba.
For the many Arab Australians, the unease of pre-war nerves has now been replaced by concern and despair for their countrymen. Near the huge Lakemba mosque, Muslims gathered to pray for a return to peace.
To the people who see in the street, he say, Salaam alaikum, which mean in English, peace for you and peace for all.
The Committee for Arab Australians is the key umbrella group representing more than 30 different Arab groups. Its leader, Assad Abdi, summed up the mood.
Very sad, like anybody else. I think the war could have been prevented.
What do you think's in the heart of a lot of Arabs here in Australia at the moment?
Sadness, because a lot of them have relatives over there.
Arab leaders are preaching moderation and calm to their community. Despite the grim news that is now filtering back from the Gulf, their reaction has been restrained. By contrast, the intemperate remarks have come from some older Australians. In one case, they were directed at an Arab at today's peace rally in the city.
Come on! You tell me, how you justify it?
I hope they wipe it right out.
Thank you very much. That's Hitler's idea, that's Bush's idea.
That's the wrong thing to say to somebody whose children could be dead, mate.
Thank you very much.
In recent days, the abuse of Arab Muslims has increased markedly. Today, police at Lakemba stepped up patrols, fearing a surge in harassment.
Mike, Ronnie, phone call away.
Yep.
I've asked the police to just go down past the mosque just to increase the safety aspect for the members of the community in that area.
In the meantime, Premier Nick Greiner is urging tolerance.
That regardless of our individual views on what is and is going to happen, that we not allow those hostilities and that conflict to translate into social conflict in New South Wales.
Arab leaders here in Australia are at pains to stress there is no chance of a terrorist attack starting from within their community. Their belief is that Arabs here, be they Iraqi, Syrian or Lebanese, see themselves as Australians first and Arabs second. Mark Burrows, National 9 News.
Telecom has more than 200 Australian advisors and their families in Saudi Arabia, but has decided not to evacuate them because of the dangers of travelling during the crisis. Back in Canberra, the Department of Foreign Affairs has opened a 24-hour crisis line for the latest information on Australians caught in the war zone.
We would like people to use restraint in one family. We'd like, if possible, one family member to do the rigging up rather than all the family, because that will make it more difficult for other families to use it.
The hotline number is 06 1191. Just repeating for friends and relatives of those in the Middle East, 06 1191. And we're going to stay with the news for another half an hour until 7 o'clock, when we'll go to Jana Vent with a special edition of A Current Affair. Jana.
Thank you, Brian. In an extended edition of A Current Affair tonight, we'll have the background analysis to the first 8 hours of the war. I'll also be joined by Defence Minister Robert Ray to discuss our involvement in the crisis, and we'll look at the country at the centre of the confrontation, Kuwait. That's at 7 o'clock. Back to you, Brian.
Welcome back to you, Jana. After the break, more on the Gulf and the latest local news, including police interviews by video.
Sky signified they were back, mission accomplished. For the pilots and the navigators of the deadly Tornado fighter bombers, it was what they'd been trained for. Relief, exhaustion, excitement, all became one as they climbed out, the first mission of their first war over.
Well, as I say, it ran on rails. It was well planned. You know, we achieved, well, we're going to have to wait and see what we achieved, but, you know, from what we saw, looked good.
How did it go? Yeah. Fine? Yep. Hold back safely. Fine, we've got to go straight into a debrief, so we're a little rushed at the moment. Please. We're all back.
Their mission was a success. Ground crews began working to get them restocked with bombs. They could be away again within 24 hours. Robert Penfold, National 9 News.
The apparent confidence of Saddam Hussein has puzzled many observers. The Iraqi president does not have powerful friends, but does seem to have everything to lose. Less certain is what he has to gain.
Saddam Hussein, a suspiciously recent but publicly fervent convert to Islam, has often used his faith to justify his stand. But his track record is that of a skilled secular leader, and there's nothing in it to explain what one observer called his present messianic mood. It may be that he's calculated that simply by surviving an American attack, he could in the end emerge as the winner.
Well, I think there is a real conviction that he may emerge as the hero of Arab nationalism, standing out against humiliation, taking on the greatest power in the world, and struggling for a new kind of Arab unity. So I think that's the terms in which he will try, of course, and present it.
There has already been evidence enough of American sensitivity to high casualties. Saddam knows his history of Vietnam and has watched the signs of nerves in Congress. Some of the European governments have shown in the past few days that they are nervous about fighting. They might begin to put pressure on Washington if large numbers are killed. Equally vulnerable is public opinion in the Arab world. It could swing violently against America if the number of Arab dead is high. There's anyway concern about the presence of foreign forces in the land of the holy places. And there's the trick he's publicly admitted he wants to pull, involving Israel and turning this into a war between Arab and Jew. If a combination of these factors forces America to sue for peace before they've achieved their objectives, and Saddam survives, his opportunities will be considerable.
If after 2 or 3 weeks of fighting, Saddam is still there and on the radio, he will claim that he has stood up to the forces of world imperialism in the United States. He will claim that he is the greatest Arab leader since the Middle Ages.
No secret that Saddam's ambitions extend to the leadership of the Arab world. The image he presents to his people makes that clear enough. The risks he's taking are enormous, but he may be convinced they're justified by the prize.
The fears of terrorist attacks here in Australia are being echoed around the world. In the lead-up to hostilities, Saddam Hussein threatened to carry the war to every corner of the globe. That threat is now being taken very seriously.
The United States is in terror of terrorism. The country has gone on the defensive, placing new barriers around the Capitol today, canceling public tours of the White House and many other government buildings, cutting off open access to the New York Stock Exchange, tightening airport security.
There must be no battery-operated electrical devices.
We do have to recognize that
that there's a very real likelihood that American citizens, American officials, American facilities are going to be targeted by terrorists.
And the public is nervous too.
They have a reputation for terrorism, and I think it's something that we really need to be aware of.
I think that it's best that they take these precautions just in case.
Just in case is the reason behind much of this security, including special FBI command centers in many cities. For though Saddam has made broad threats against the U.S., there is no hard intelligence on specific targets.
If any crazy person is willing to give his life, he can go forward at this time and commit an act that could harm people. So any of the security measures that we see taken around here at this time seem perfectly reasonable.
And the U.S. is not alone in its fear of terrorism. In Paris today, every piece of luggage was being checked. In London, armored vehicles now ring Heathrow Airport.
Military analysts say the massive air offensive is likely to last several days before it's backed up by other forces. But ground troops may be involved sooner than expected. An extra 10,000 in Saudi Arabia are now moving towards the front.
It amounts to a single military convoy stretching virtually uninterrupted for 150 miles across Arabia's eastern province. Never so much military hardware moved so quickly into such a small area with such concentrated firepower. This is the road to one of the large border towns this morning. Abandoned by most of its residents, thousands have fled from here in the last week. The Al-Shamri family were cutting it fine, but this was nothing new. They had already fled from Kuwait and would now sit out any war, camping in the desert well to the south. "See you in a free Kuwait," said Mr. Shamri. Even the Bedouins were on the move. This morning, mustering their herd of camels for the long trek to safety. Nomads in no man's land.
Start taking your nets off this packet. You go 2 minutes after that one.
The British forces were also moving off, but in a different direction. A field ambulance unit heading out to join up with the 7th Brigade.
More on the Gulf later, but now to other news. And for the first time in 9 months, there's been a fall in the number of people out of work. The December unemployment rate was down to 8.1%. The figures in New South Wales are the lowest in the country at 7.4%. A dramatic siege in Brisbane today with an off-duty policeman holding colleagues at bay.